2015 meeting of the Dover City Council to order. Please rise for the invocation by Bishop Thomas L. Halsey, followed by the pledge to our nation's flag, which will be led by Deputy Chief Maley.
Our Heavenly Father, we come before you again. We ask for grace and mercy. And ask that you touch our fire chief, Mr. Mark Hall, and the loss of his grandmother, Shirley Hall. Comfort that family and give them strength right now. If there's any sickness among our city council members or their families, we ask that you touch now in the name of Jesus. And you give grace and mercy. As we go through this meeting, we ask, Lord, that you give us understanding and peace of mind. In Jesus' name we pray, amen.
Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
You have before you this evening's agenda. Are there any additions or deletions to the agenda?
If there is none, I'll go ahead and make a motion to approve the agenda as presented.
Second.
Motion's been made by Councilman Hutchison and seconded by Councilman Sudler to accept the agenda as printed. Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion carries unanimously. We now have before us the consent agenda. Those items on the council agenda which are considered routine and non-controversial are marked with an asterisk and will be acted upon by a single roll call vote of the council. There will be no separate discussion of these items unless a member of council so requests, in which event the matter shall be removed from the consent agenda and considered a separate item. What is the pleasure of council?
Move to accept the consent agenda.
Second.
Been moved by Councilman Hare and seconded by Councilman Hosfeld to accept the consent agenda. Are there any questions on the motion? Seeing none, Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Mr. Anderson?
Yes.
Mr. Sudler?
Yes.
Mr. Neal?
Yes.
Mr. Lewis?
Yes.
Mr. Hosfeld?
Yes.
Mr. Hare?
Yes.
Mr. Hutchison?
Yes.
Mr. Slade?
Yes. Motion carries 8-0. Item number 2, public hearing, violation of the dangerous building ordinance, property located at 200 Northwest Street, owned by Mary Lou Bashore. I would request that Ms. Anne Marie Townsend, Director of our Planning and Community Development, brief council on this item.
Thank you. Okay, again, the property we're looking at is 200 Northwest Street. Since 2002, there have been 20 code enforcement cases. There have been abandoned and junked vehicles, junk and debris, parking on the grass, old tires in the yard, tree overgrowth, grass, busted doors and windows. Utilities were terminated in January 2008 and remained off until new services were connected August 4th of 2014, and those services were related to renovations that were going on. The property was registered vacant by staff in January 2013 and condemned in June 2013 due to no active utilities, a number of open code violations, busted windows and doors. The staff had the doors and windows boarded to secure the building. It's a residential property, but it is a residential unit in the M manufacturing zone. And because it had been vacant for more than a year, the legal non-conforming use status had expired. January 15th, 2014, the Board of Adjustment granted a variance to allow the residential use to continue. According to the zoning ordinance, if the work is not commenced and continued diligently, is the language in the code, within a year of the variance, then the variance expires. The work commenced but did not continue diligently, and the building permit ultimately expired. On December 9th, 2014, that was the only inspection that was scheduled by our building inspection staff, and the work that was done was disapproved. So there have been no inspections of anything that passed. It's being brought forward as being unfit for habitation. It's a concern to general welfare. There are a number of code violations, and again, it's been vacant for a number of years. This is the property from the street, from Northwest Street. This is from the side, is it Cecil Street kind of ends right there. So there is a little piece of unimproved Cecil Street on the south side of it. You can see there is a barbed wire fence very close to the property. You'll see it in some of the other slides. The property is adjacent on two sides to Teal Construction. So it is adjacent to a very active industrial property. Again, this is showing where we've boarded it. These are the exterior. You can see there's some deterioration in the roof. Again, it's probably about, I think, 3 or 4 feet from the barbed wire fence. You can see concerns with the foundation. There's a shed. This is the interior. These pictures of the interior were taken in 2013. We do not have more recent pictures, so there were, again, some improvements made. None of them were inspected to be code compliant. Again, some more of the interior. You can see the degradation of the flooring, the walls. Ceiling. Electric. Again, there's just some clutter in there. But in general, it's in very poor condition. Staff's recommendation is to declare the building and any accessory structures on the property dangerous and to order that the property be repaired or demolished by August 13th, which is a month, and if not done by the owner, that we would cause the repair or demolition if it's not done by the owner within 10 days, and then to proceed with a lien to be able to recover the costs. Again, one of the challenges with this property is it is a house and it cannot be restored to a residential use due to the nonconformity with the zoning ordinance unless there is another variance granted by the Board of Adjustment. So when we did get a permit application in May to do repairs, we can't grant it if it's not compliant with the zoning ordinance. So with that, I would take any questions.
Are there any questions for Mrs. Townsend? Councilman Hare.
Could you go back to the first slide?
That one?
No, the first wording one. There. Is that it?
Yeah.
Okay, the utilities were terminated in 2008, remained off. Why wasn't something done between 2008 and 2014?
It wasn't until, I'm trying to think of when, it wasn't until about 2012, I think, that we started very aggressively enforcing the vacant building ordinance when we assigned an inspector to do that enforcement. You know, again, we had kept an eye on it, we had boarded it. I will say that the property is owned by Mary Lou Bayshore. It was owned jointly by her and her husband. Her husband passed away just before this went to the Board of Adjustment, so toward the end of 2013. So, you know, we were trying to be patient because there were other circumstances and quite frankly, there were properties in worse condition that we brought forward in the meantime.
Councilman Sutherland.
Yes, when was the last time that you spoke with Ms. Bayshore?
I have not talked to her in several months, but I believe she did talk to Tim Torella last week.
Okay. Do you know the content of that conversation?
I do not.
Okay, thank you.
I believe she's here this evening, so.
Okay, thank you very much.
Other questions for Mrs. Townsend? Thank you, Mrs. Townsend. I'll now declare the public hearing open. Is there anyone who would like to speak in favor of declaring this property dangerous? Anyone who would like to speak in favor of declaring the property dangerous? Against, is anyone who would like to speak against declaring this property dangerous? You can please come forward and state your name and address for the record.
My name's Mary Lou Bayshore, and my husband and I, John Bayshore, owned this house until he unexpectedly died on August 24th of 2014. At the time of his death, he was in the process of restoring this house. We refinanced several different things for him to be able to do that, and if he had been able to do it, it would have cost a lot less financially than if I had to hire someone. When he passed away unexpectedly, my sons tried their best to restore the house to a financial demise because of what my husband could do himself. They were hiring people to do, and the cost of doing this renovation was exorbitant. So we had to stop. We put $10,000 going forward, and we had no more money because of all the other things that my husband was involved with that I was left to handle. And every day of my life, I get up and try to handle the properties that he owns in Chestertown, the properties that he owns in Elkton, Maryland, the properties that he owns down here in Dover that are rented and, bringing in an income. This property, houses in Elkton, Maryland, and also, maintaining the business that he owned, which was a 24-hour answering service for doctors, which I also own one in Newcastle County. So all the responsibilities of the things that he was into fell on my shoulders, and I've been split in all directions. So when I realized that I did not have the finances to continue with the restoration of the house at 200 Northwest Street, I put the house up for sale. I've had approximately 7 people interested in it, and I do have a contract on it, signed contract for someone who wants to buy it and restore it. But I was not aware that it couldn't be restored and made a residential property. I've just never done any of this before, and this is just something I'm learning as I go along, but I've never been told that. The person that wants that has submitted the contract to me is willing to start working on it tomorrow and have the renovations done. I mean, it would be a terrible waste to lose one piece of housing in Dover and just have it torn down, because a lot of work has been done inside. It's been totally gutted. Everything's ready for the drywall. Everything's ready for, the electric's already been installed. It just has to be wired. It's going to be like a new house when it gets finished. And my husband really and truly didn't want to see this house torn down. It was something that, he was really adamant about. And if there's anything that I can do to keep that from happening, I would like to do it. I would like to have some time rather than just 30 days, maybe even 60 days, if I could get an extension so that we can go ahead and get the variance for it to be a residential property. There's other people interested in it. This contract is fine with me if he can produce the work, and he's here to speak also, the person that's buying it, of what he intends to do with it so that it isn't demolished.
May I have questions from Councilman? Councilman Sutler?
First of all, I'd like to say I'm sorry for your loss, Mrs. Bayshore.
Thank you.
Second, so the contract that you have with the potential buyer, it's pretty much confirmed.
He's here to back that up. I have the signature and everything on the contract.
Okay, and you have applied for the variance, or you're going to
Not
apply?
yet. I didn't know
for
I
variance?
needed to.
Okay.
But I'm the kind of person that will do whatever I'm asked to do to try to, go along with what is needed, so I don't break the law.
Yes, ma'am. Okay, no further questions. Thank you.
Mr. Anderson, excuse me, Councilman Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. President. May I ask an informational question of Mrs. Townsend? Thank you. How long does it take for the process for a variance before the Board of Adjustment?
The application deadline is typically the second Friday of the month. So the next application deadline would be the second Friday in August, and that would go to the Board of Adjustment in September.
All right, thank you. Appreciate it.
Councilman Sudler.
Ms. Townsend, how long does that process take usually once they submit an application for variance? Does 2 weeks, 3 weeks?
It would
for
go-
approval or non-approval?
Again, it's based on a deadline. The next application deadline is the beginning of August. It would go to the Board of Adjustment the third week in September. We don't have any flexibility with that.
Okay, so basically by the next meeting, they'll have approval or disapproval of their
No.
application? Or-
The end of, the middle of, the third week in September is when the Board of Adjustment would hear it.
Okay, thank you.
Councilman Hare.
Was this house ever residentially zoned?
I didn't research that far back. A lot of that area was kind of developed before zoning. So there's nothing in that area on that side of the street. The way West Street is, the west side of the street, between the street and the railroad tracks, is all industrial. And the east side of the street is residential.
But if this was built back when, and it was residential,
Right.
and it's been there so long, isn't there
The
any grandfather? I mean,
the zoning ordinance allows for a nonconforming use to continue as long as it remains consistently used for that use and doesn't discontinue for a period of more than a year. So if you look at, there were utilities disconnected in 2008, and it's been vacant since then.
Can they
That's
return?
why they went to the Board of Adjustment. So the Board of Adjustment granted a variance on January 15th, 2014. I actually sent Mrs. Bayshore a letter dated June 8th to let her know that the building permit was expiring and that the variance was expired and that we couldn't extend the permit because the variance was expired. The challenge is, again, it's a variance request to the Board of Adjustment. It's a use variance, which is a higher legal test. So I can't make any assurances as to whether or not the residential use would be able to continue. That's for the Board of Adjustment to determine.
Well, it seems to me it'd be pretty silly to tear down a house that someone's willing to renovate and get it all fixed back up and just keep it on the tax rolls. Okay.
Any other questions from council members? Councilman Hospital.
I did, for Ms. Townsend. The pictures that you took of the exterior of the house, when did you take those?
Tim took them. I think they were taken in the last week or so.
Okay, I drove by this property yesterday, as well as the other one upcoming, and I thought those pictures actually did it some justice to what I saw yesterday. If I lived in that neighborhood, I would be upset with the fact that that house was next to my property, or adjacent to my property, or across the street from my property. If it's been in this condition since 2008, that would be very upsetting to me as a resident of that area, that in fact something hadn't been done before now.
Thank you, Mrs. Mitchell. Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to come forward and speak against declaring this property dangerous? Sir, if you could come forward and give us your name and address for the record. Thank you.
My name is Rodney McKenzie, address 725 Bacon Avenue, Dover, Delaware, 19901. I would be the gentleman that Mr. Mary spoke about. And I hear your concern, Mr. James, about the property being in such condition. I would like to ask you, how would you feel if work was started as soon as possible on restoring that property, improving your property values, or to help maintain your value on where it is today? And again, it was another gentleman, I believe Mr. William, was saying something about tearing down the property when, don't get me wrong, and I thought he made a comment that said, you know, it would be kind of foolish to tear down the property when it could be restored. Again, I would be the gentleman who would be buying it, and I would like to, if, you know, deemed necessary by Dover, you know, the city, I'd like to begin work as soon as possible on doing everything that's necessary to restore the home and make it a beautiful residence for another homeowner. And again, if this can be considered, I'd like to start everything as soon as possible. And you know, I just hope it's not too late. And you know, that's all I have. Again, you know, me and Ms. Mary do have a contract pending, you know, on the outcome of this meeting. If the House was granted some time where I can get in and do what I have to do, then we would commence and move forward with our process. So if possible, I'm a man of my word, I will step in and do what needs to be done as soon as possible.
Councilman Neal.
Is this house going to be, are you living in it, or is this a speculation house where you're going to sell it, or are you going to rent it?
This would be an investment property for me that I intend to fix up and sell.
And sell, not rent?
Well, it also can be a rental property as well. You know, I would probably put it on the market, but if the market is not bringing a buyer, then I'd actually have tenants who's ready to rent as well. So, you know, either option would work, but I would opt for putting on the market first.
How many other houses do you have that you sell or rent?
Well, we usually do maybe about 1 to 2 a month, and we're actually working throughout the whole county of buying houses, fixing them up, restoring them, and selling them back. So we actually have staff who's very proficient in this area.
Thank you.
Just wanted to caution you about one item, and that is that whatever action this council takes or doesn't take has no bearing on what the Board of Adjustment may or may not do vis-a-vis the variance that's before you. So if you were to be granted extra time, when you began the work, it would be at your own risk, because the Board of Variance would then have to rule on whether it could be used as a residence.
Right, and we can't issue a permit for residential renovations until the Board of Adjustment would take action, because the building codes that would apply if it were to be restored as a commercial type building would be different than if they were than a residential building. So we can't even issue a permit until the Board of Adjustment were to take action.
Is that what was mentioned as far as, you know, waiting until September? Is that what you were talking about a little bit earlier? Okay.
Councilman Sutherland.
Yes, Mr. McKenzie, have you thought about, if that is the case, possibly turning into a commercial type building for sale? Have you done that before, sir?
No, I haven't,
Commercial.
but it could be considered.
Okay.
It could be considered.
Thank you, sir.
Councilman Neal.
Yeah, Ms. Townsend, if this building is torn down, can it, then the ground could be sold for commercial purposes? Is that correct?
It's zoned manufacturing. I think part of what contributed to the property getting a variance before is that it's a very small property, and it'd be very difficult to establish a new manufacturing use on that property. So there's a lot of challenges with the property due to the size, the zoning, the fact that it is surrounded by industrial on two sides. So in theory, it could be developed under the manufacturing zone, but there would probably be very few uses that would really fit on the property once you take into account the size.
I think that if the building was torn down, it could be then actually another house, a residence could be built there with a variance. Is that correct?
With a use variance, but again, it would be a the legal standard for a use variance is a very difficult standard to meet. So To my knowledge, since I've been here, this property is the only use variance that they have granted.
Thank you.
Councilman Sutler.
Can you please define use variance?
It would be, a use variance is allowing a use that is not permitted by the zoning ordinance.
Thank you.
Councilman Hosfeld.
On the south side of the house is Cecil Street extended, for lack
Yes.
of a better term. And that's a dirt lane at this point.
Yes.
If we, say we go through this process, we get the variance and the house turns into be a wonderful residence, at some point, is the city going to then be responsible to pave that road and make that a dedicated roadway?
It's a dedicated right-of-way. We have talked, and I know Mr. Harris mentioned this, about paving at least a portion of that. It would be a substandard pavement, because it wouldn't be the width of a normal road, it wouldn't have curb, but it is a right-of-way that exists within the city that's technically unimproved at this point. So we've talked about paving, a 15-foot wide swath so you can come in and out of those businesses. I think this house takes the driveway off of that dirt gravel road.
Thank you.
Councilman Hare.
That road that you're talking about is the one that everyone takes to go into the recycle?
Right, this is I think it's the unimproved right-of-way of, I think it's Terrapin Recycling. It's aluminum and metal recycling.
Go in that back way.
It's the one you've talked to me about.
Any further questions of the council? Thank you, Mr. McKenzie. Is there anyone else who would like to come forward and speak against declaring this property dangerous? Seeing none, I'll declare the public hearing closed. What is the pleasure of council? Councilman Sutler.
I move to allow Ms. Bayshore a 90-day extension to see if she can be approved the variance so that she can make the sale and it can be converted over to, a home for the future.
Second.
Motion's been made by Councilman Sutler and seconded by Councilman Anderson to extend a 90-day extension to the current owner in order to go through the variance process. Any questions on the motion?
Can we, in
Mrs.
doing that,
Townsend.
set a date?
So you want to know what exactly 90
Right,
days is?
so 90 days from today, which would, typically we go by 30 days from.
90 days extension or 90 days
So,
from today?
right, that was my question. Is it 90 days in addition to what staff has recommended, or is it 90 days from today?
We'll do 90 days from today.
Isn't it?
So clarification is the motion is 90 days from today's date. Councilman Hare.
Now, that's going to be enough time to cover the variance, to see if they get the variance approved, right?
If
'Cause
they,
August,
again, if they,
September.
if they make the,
We should go into October.
Because if they filed for the variance this month, it'll go to the August hearing, or,
no, it would go to the September Planning Commission, because I believe this month's deadline is already passed.
okay, so it'll go to September, which would
Right.
then be 60 days.
Right,
And it'll go 30 days beyond that, so if they give the variance,
right.
then will they have to come back? If they get the variance and they start doing the work, then they'll have to come back and ask,
Well, if they're progressing well with the work, then I think we wouldn't bring it back if it's moving
but they can't do
forward.
anything until they find out.
But they
if
can't do it, right.
Until they get the
And-
variance.
And, one thing we might want to do is determine, because again, you can see in the picture, there are foundation issues. If it needs a structural engineer report, then we would need to have that sooner. We probably don't want to wait to have that, but we can't issue a permit until, so they can,
But they could get a structural engineer's report without a permit.
yes. And that would be part of their permit submission.
They'd have to have that anyhow when they come to the Board of Variance, right?
They don't need the structural engineer's report, they just need the plot plan
Okay,
that shows, and pictures.
okay.
The motion before us that's been made and properly seconded is for a 90-day extension. With the understanding that that's enough time to get through the variance process. Any further discussion? Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Mr. Anderson?
Yes.
Mr. Sedler?
Yes.
Mr. Neal?
Yes.
Mr. Lewis?
Yes.
Mr. Hosfeld?
Yes.
Mr. Hare?
Yes.
Mr. Hutchison?
No.
Mr. Sleep?
Yes, motion passes 7-1. Item number 3 is a public hearing for violation of the dangerous building ordinance for property located at 311 North Governors Avenue, owned by Jean E. McDonald. Request Mrs. Townsend to please brief council on this item.
Thank you. Okay, this property has had 16 code enforcement cases since 2002, a number of exterior violations, trash in the yard, vehicles on the grass, flaking paint, interior violation, the main one being excessive load in the structure caused by hoarding conditions and weak floors within the home. Utilities were terminated on April 1st, and city staff condemned the property on April 8th, both of 2014. It is registered as a vacant building. A renovation permit has been submitted, and this isn't approved by staff. It hasn't been approved by me yet. So it's been approved by the building staff. There is $400 in unpaid code enforcement fines. Part of the challenge with the renovation permit is, and we've experienced this before with buildings that have had hoarding conditions, is that when you have weak floors and significant weight in materials, we have concerns about shifting the weight and the structural stability of the building. So I think, which is why I haven't signed off on the permit yet, so I need to make sure that we get that addressed. Again, it's being brought forward, it's unfit for habitation, it's a concern to general welfare, there are a number of code violations, and it is currently unoccupied. This is the property from North Governors Avenue, and from the rear, again, there's just stuff in the yard, which has been one of the violations. Now we get into the interior. You can see the deterioration on the interior. And the hoarding conditions as well. So, there's issues like mold and other deterioration of the structure, and then a lot of stuff. These are the steps going to the second floor. You can see, again, some structural concerns that we would want to see addressed. Concerns with the ceiling here. Again, just more of the hoarding condition that exists. So our recommendation is to declare the building and any accessory structures on the property dangerous, to order that it be repaired or demolished by August 13th. And again, the repair needs to, we can't really allow for renovations to start while there are, until it's cleaned out and we know it's okay to clean out. And then to order if not demolished or repaired by the owner by August 13th, to proceed with demolition, and then to recover the costs as specified in the action form. So with that, I would take any questions.
Questions for Mrs. Townsend? Councilman Hosfeld.
The red placard with the white X, what does that mean when I see that?
That is, our staff went out with the fire department probably about 2 years ago, and we started placarding properties. If it has the X on it, it means that it shouldn't be inhabited. So, and the notice to the fire department is if they come upon it, that there are structural concerns, use caution, don't enter, should be vacant.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Councilman Lewis.
What is the position of the owner? Have you had contact with the owner?
Our staff has had contact with the owner. My understanding is that she is out of state at the moment, or at least was on their last contact with her.
Taxes are being paid on this property?
I believe so, yes.
They're not delinquent?
I do
to
not
your
believe so.
knowledge?
Other questions of staff? Councilman Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. President. Have you had any contact with them about their response to the structural engineer? And any expectation on that, because that's what's holding up the building permit that they applied for that's been otherwise approved, is that correct?
Our staff has had discussions about the concern of shifting the weight and that being something that we need to be mindful of. I don't know if there have been specific discussions about a structural engineer. And my understanding from staff is that there have not been detailed discussions. It's been a permit application and that there has not been a lot of dialogue.
So we don't have any feedback by that, we just know. Now, have they ever, has this ever been an issue before where they have not followed through on repairs, or is this the first time they've pulled a building permit to repair? Is it the same owner?
It is the same owner, and I believe this is the first application for a permit that we've had to address these violations. But again, the structural violations can't be addressed while before the house is cleaned out.
Do you have any idea what's different? I mean, why all of a sudden they're wanting to repair it when it's been how many years?
We frequently get an application submitted once we tell them it's scheduled for city council. I mean, we see that with a lot of buildings that we bring forward, that the permit comes in the week before it comes to city council.
Thank you.
Other questions for Mrs. Townsend? Thank you, Mrs. Townsend. I'll go ahead and declare the public hearing open. Is there anyone who would like to speak in favor of declaring the property dangerous? Anyone who would like to speak in favor of declaring the property dangerous? Against? Anyone who would like to speak against declaring this property dangerous? Anyone who would like to speak against declaring this property dangerous? I'll declare the public hearing closed. What is the pleasure of council? Councilman, I'm sorry, Mrs. Townsend.
I
would
just
like
need to
add-
make a correction. I apologize. There is a structural engineering report that talks about what they need to do in order to remove the items from the house. So I
Thank you, Mrs.
apologize.
Townsend. Councilman Hosfeld.
I move that we follow staff's recommendations in regards to 311 North Governors Avenue.
Second.
Motion's been made by Councilman Hosfeld, seconded by Councilman Hutchison to accept staff recommendation on the property in question. Is there any discussion? Councilman Hare.
Question for Anne Marie. Can a building permit be issued if there's outstanding violations and fines due?
If it's a dangerous building, yes.
Okay.
But if it's typically, we would still request payment at the time of permit issuance.
Councilman Sutler.
Yes, when we deem it as a dangerous building, do we as the city get a engineer to come out and confirm that it's a dangerous building and that the foundation is actually faulty?
No, the dangerous building under the code, there are a number of definitions. So it doesn't necessarily need to be structurally unsound. In some cases, they're vacant. In this case, you've got hoarding conditions, it's vacant, it's a blight to the neighborhood, those types of issues. If you look at the definitions in the code under dangerous buildings, would take it in that direction.
Just a follow-up question. So we, in any situation, when we look at a foundation, we don't use an engineer to confirm that that building is dangerous or that structure is actually dangerous. The city doesn't have an engineer to back up what our code enforcement officers are saying.
Right. When we say it's dangerous, we're saying it meets the definitions
Right.
set forth in the code.
Right,
It
right.
doesn't necessarily mean that it's structurally deficient
Okay.
in those ways.
Right.
What we will require a structural engineering report
Okay.
if we observe conditions that lead us to believe there could be structural problems. And that is required not before demolition, but before we could issue a permit for repair.
Thank you. Thank you.
So the motion's been made by Councilman Hosfeld, seconded by Councilman Hutchison. Any other discussion? Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Mr. Anderson?
Yes.
Mr. Sudler?
Yes.
Mr. Neal?
Yes.
Mr. Lewis?
Yes.
Mr. Hosfeld?
Yes.
Mr. Hare?
Yes.
Mr. Hutchison?
Yes.
Mr. Slavin?
Yes, motion passes 8-0. Now go to item number 9 on the agenda, grant application evaluation, water treatment plant process improvements. Mr. Koenig, would you please brief council on this item?
Thank you, Mr. Slavin. In the packet tonight is an action form prepared by the Public Works Department staff. And in FY15, the city began working on a project to improve the treatment processes at the Long Point Road Water Treatment Plant. This plant began operation in approximately 1994, and the treatment equipment is the original equipment that's been installed. And it has aged over time and gone from being state-of-the-art to really obsolete in the treatment industry. We began the design phase in FY15. The first table shows what the projected project's costs were, including FY15 design of $175,000. And then we had planned construction at roughly $1.2 million over FY16 and 17. All of the funding for the project originally was proposed out of the water fund, and that's how our budget and capital plan were prepared. Design work began in the fall of 2014, and the original intent was to replace the existing treatment methods with similar technology, but more state-of-the-art machinery. After the consulting engineers have visited the site and began the sampling, as well as trying to anticipate how our treatment methods will coincide with current standards and regulations, it's been determined that the methods that we originally intended to use will not function at the level that we anticipate. So we have to modify our design requirements and engage additional design costs. There's a revised proposal. We, as I said, in FY15 thought the design budget would be $175,000. We spent about $26,000 of that $175,000. However, the total design cost we're anticipating now at $310,275. Staff has looked at the ways to offset some of the increase of the design cost, and we're requesting permission from City Council to submit a drinking water matching planning grant, which treatment facilities and water facilities qualify for. We believe we'll be successful, and that the availability of that grant will be $79,744. And it is the intent to apply for the grant, complete the rest of the design in FY16, and then reevaluate what the construction dollars would be once the final designs are done. So the FY16 budget will cover a design cost with some money left over for construction. However, we believe the construction cost will be significantly higher than the anticipated $1.2 million. So we will have to bring back a funding plan for the final capital improvements associated with the construction costs that will have to be evaluated with the FY17 budget and the 5-year plan going forward from that. This treatment facility is one of the primary sources of production for the new Calpine plant. Originally, when the Long Point Road treatment plant was constructed, it was anticipated that this would be the baseline flow for the system. In the 20-plus years since it was constructed, it has been really used as a peaking plant, especially in the summertime for the increase in water usage across the system. However, now that the Calpine facility is in operation, this is an important facility for stable production across the city. We are recommending that we be authorized to apply for the grant and then continue with final design of the improvements for the Long Point Road treatment plant. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Questions for Mr. Carney? Councilman Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have two questions. One is this a state grant or is it a pass-through from the federal government?
This is part of the state revolving fund. It's similar to the money that we used for the Tar Ditch project. I think it's all state money, though. I don't, Donna.
Yeah. Several of the revolving loan funds are partial federal money. So because they do involve federal money on some of them now, whether this one was specifically or not, I don't know. But I know that our federal audit that we get each year, at the end of each year for the A133 audit for federal monies, we have to include this grant money when we get, or the revolving fund loan money, if we get that money from the state, because it is federal, some of it, so.
And then that brings me to the second part of the question. What strings would we be obligating ourselves to?
On the planning grant side, I don't believe that there are specific strings. If we do construction financing through them, there may be some specific strings for the actual wage rates and stuff. But on the planning side, I don't believe there are.
Is this a true grant or do we have to pay this back?
We pay the contractor or the engineering firm, and then we submit bills for reimbursement. So the $79,000 that we're talking about here, we do not have to pay back to the state.
Thank you.
Other questions of staff? Councilman Hutchinson.
Mr. President, I'll go ahead and make a motion. We follow staff recommendation to apply for the grant in the amount of $79,744.
Second.
Motion been made by Councilman Hutchinson, seconded by Councilman Anderson to accept staff recommendation. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Mr. Anderson?
Yes.
Mr. Sedler?
Yes.
Mr. Neal?
Yes.
Mr. Lewis?
Yes.
Mr. Hosfeld?
Yes.
Mr. Hare?
Yes.
Mr. Hutchison?
Yes.
Mr. Slavin?
Yes, motion passes 8-0. Now have before us agenda item number 11, council member announcements. Are there any announcements from council members? Councilman Anderson.
You want to take this one? Okay, I'll take this one then. Mr.
Make sure you give
President,
him
I'd
some,
like
huh?
to, teamwork here, teamwork.
Fourth district.
Fourth District works together. I just want to point out to everyone who may be watching this, that Monday, July 20th, the Delaware Attorney General's Office is having a housing workshop, which will be at the Modern Maturity Center between 1 p.m. and 7 p.m., and they'll have educational sessions. It's basically going to provide you information of your rights in housing, how not to get scammed, how to find certified housing counselors, mortgage lenders. There will even be servicers on site who will be able to answer questions, as well as representatives from the Attorney General's office and I believe Housing Authority and other agencies. That is, and anyone who wants more information can go to DelawareHomeownerRelief.com. And that's coming up Monday, July 20th, next Monday, a week from now.
Thank you. Councilman Sutton.
You got one?
The 4th District City Council persons Roy Sutler Jr. and David Anderson will partner with Mount Zion AME Church Social Action Commission to conduct a roundtable dialogue concerning the City of Dover's off-road vehicle ordinance and constituents' reports of shot fired in residents' home on Kirkwood, Queen, and New Street in Dover, Delaware. The date will be Thursday, the 16th of July, 2015. The time is at 7 p.m. to 9 p.m., and the location will be at Solid Rock Baptist Church Community Center, which is at 113 Northwest Street, Dover, Delaware. For additional information, please contact Councilman Sudler or Councilman Anderson. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Sutler. Other announcements? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn into special council meeting to discuss legal matters.
So moved.
Moved by Councilman Sutler and seconded by Councilman Neal. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.